Thank you, everyone, for coming. I know it's the end of the day, and I'm sure we're all extraordinarily tired. I know I myself am completely exhausted, so it absolutely means a lot that you are here. So this is No More Excuses, your guide to accessible game design. I am Tara Voelker. I'm an accessibility advocate, and you can find me on Twitter at Lady Au Pair if you want to ask me any questions. All right, so a little bit about me before we dive in too much. So I have experience in both game accessibility nonprofits and AAA studios. I've worked at a few different ones. The three you've probably heard of are Volition, the guys who did the Red Faction and Saints Row series, Irrational Games. I was there for BioShock Infinite. And now I'm currently at Ready at Dawn, and we just launched the Order 1886. Working there, I do mostly quality assurance management and user research. But my true passion is game accessibility and helping gamers with disabilities and teaching designers and developers in general how they can better make their games so that this player base can engage their titles. I've worked for a few different nonprofits, but the two that you're most likely to have heard of are the Able Gamers Foundation here in the US. I originally got picked up by them as a reviewer and staff writer. I later did some fundraising and consultations. I later joined the IGDA Game Accessibility Special Interest Group. I was the chairperson there for a few years, and I led up some major initiatives such as our partnership with Film Victoria and the grant guidelines funding that they did there. All right, so what are we actually going to be talking about today? So I'm first going to preface this on who has a disability and what that means for games. There are a lot of different ways that people may think about impairments and what being a disabled gamer actually is and who that affects. I'm then going to go on to talk about features to improve your title, and a lot of this is going to seem really, really basic, but my motivation for doing this talk is they are basic things that, as an industry, we keep messing up when it doesn't really make sense to. And then finally, I'm going to have a list of resources, so when you leave here and you're like, oh my god, Tara's a genius, I want to do all of this stuff, you can go ahead and go do it on your own. All right, so how do you think of disability? When I say someone has a disability, everyone in this room is likely thinking something different because there are multiple ways to think about and define a disability. Now, the first model is the medical model. For a long time, it was actually the standard way to think of it. In this view, a disability is a result of some sort of condition that needs treatment or therapy. The goal here is to try to manage whatever is causing the person to not lead a normal life based on what society considers normal. It's something that you should try to fix. There's also the government model, and this one is incredibly, incredibly strict. If you aren't being given Social Security payouts, in this model, you pretty much don't have a disability. In the government side, you really only have a disability if you can't do substantial gainful activity, such as holding down a full-time job. Sorry, I'm really thirsty. There's caffeine in here. Like I said, I'm exhausted. So neither of these definitions are great. So a quote from Deborah Kaplan, the director of the World Institute on Disability, says, "The cultural habit of regarding the condition of the person, not the built environment or the societal organization of the activities, as the source of the problem runs deep." Now you may be saying, I'm not really sure what that means, but it's actually what leads us into the social model. So the social model is actually how most people with an impairment think about disabilities themselves. It states that it's not the physical impairment resulting in a disability, but how their impairment reacts with societal norms that is causing them to be disabled. So what does this mean? In the societal example, a person who's confined to a wheelchair has an impairment, but they are not inherently disabled. In a post-Title III of Americans with Disability Act here in the USA, we know as a society it's probably a good idea to put ramps and elevators in buildings so that people in wheelchairs can get into them. We didn't always think like that. But coming up to those buildings in a wheelchair is what was creating the disability. Someone in a wheelchair can lead a completely normal life until they encounter a set of stairs, and now they're prevented from doing what everyone else is doing, and that's just entering this building. So as you've noticed, all three of these definitions have like widely varying groups. Some people are obviously disabled under one definition, but would not consider themselves being disabled under one of the other ones. So how are we going to talk about it today? When I talk about being disabled, I'm using the International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health, or the ICF. It's basically an umbrella terms for impairments. So having, for example, cerebral palsy isn't a disability, it's an impairment. Being colorblind doesn't make you disabled, it's an impairment. So when I'm talking about that, I'm talking more about an umbrella term of these impairments. So, talking numbers. How many people with disabilities actually are there out there? If you look at a 2012 report from the US Census using the census data from 2010, we actually find out that the report headlines that 1 in 5 people have some sort of disability. The actual specific number is 19.3%. And this percentage translates to similar populations. So if you go to, look at UK citizenship, they have a very similar percentage of people with disabilities under a very similar definition. But you have to think that number actually doesn't qualify everyone that we really need to think about. For example, I always say more than 20% of people have an impairment you need to consider. I just said 19.3, but that survey, for example, doesn't color colorblindness or low reading level or what's known as future impairments. And when I'm talking about future impairments, I just mean those who don't have a disability now but will in the future. And this can even include injuries, so broken arms, arthritis. They're 2 things that we don't think about people being disabled with, but deeply impact the way that you would engage a video game. I'm thirsty. Sorry, guys. All right, and it's actually a lot more likely than you think to be one of the people that encounters such future impairments. According to the Council for Disability Awareness, just over 1 in 4 of today's 20-year-olds will have at least a temporary impairment before they retire. So it's a substantial amount of people who will encounter this. Now I know what you're thinking. You're like, oh my God, all those statistics are great, Tara, but my player base is not a one-to-one comparison with the entire US population. And I get that. But we actually know a lot of info on disabled gamers. According to a survey that was done by PopCap, more than 1 in 5, it was actually 20.5% of the players of their casual games had a physical, mental, or developmental impairment. When you use that same definition of impairment, only 15.1% of the American population fell into that category. So we actually found out that disabled gamers are overrepresented in the actual player base. Now, the next question I always get when I throw out that fact is, well, what about hardcore gamers? I actually don't know. There's not really data on it. I would probably suggest that the number is lower, but there's a reason we don't know. Hardcore games are inherently more inaccessible to these types of gamers. So are they not playing because they don't want to, or are they not playing because we can't? So, but you should really engage this group. In the same PopCap study, they found that the gamers with disabilities, they played more frequently, they play for more hours per week, they play for longer periods of time per gaming session. And they also reported far greater experience and significant benefits from playing. And they view their gameplay as a more important factor in their lives than the non-disabled gamers. And helping them helps you. So it's known, disabled gamers are proven to be more dedicated customers. They're more likely to refer their games to friends. They're more likely to buy additional titles from you once they've seen that you have the features they need to be able to play. And like I said before, the things that you're going to do for this group is going to result in a better overall product for the rest of your player base. Now, there are a few different examples of that kind of work, and I'll talk about that a little more later. But for example, making improvements to your subtitles, which you would think of as doing something for people who are hard of hearing, is going to make a huge impact on any title that, for example, is launching in a region when they're only localizing text and not voiceover. This is a huge thing with AAA games. But also allowing greater control over difficulty level, for example, which is amazing for gamers with disabilities, would also be great for maybe gamers who are looking for a more narrative experience but are struggling with the combat in your game. So, what can you do? Now remember, these gamers have impairments, and they only have disabilities because as a society and as an industry, we haven't worked to make sure they have the tools that they need to play. We're basically not providing them a ramp into a building that only has stairs. So there's a certain level of responsibility that we can take on as developers to help these people. Now, there are lots of different groups out there. such as the Able Gamers Foundation, Special Effect, and the IGDA Game Accessibility SIG, who have tons of guidelines, information on what features are most helpful. And basically what I did is dig through all of this research for you so that you don't have to. So if you're going to focus on some things, let's just start with what I have here in the presentation. All right, now bear with me. This is going to get really listy, and this is a very information-dense talk, so I'm just going to be dropping tons of stuff on you all the time, and I'm really sorry. But I'm going to have about 14 features that I'll think will make the most impact, and I want to say this is Duffy the Disney Bear. I don't know how much of you guys know about Disney. And he's getting hashtag Disney drunk. It's a real hashtag on Instagram, so you can look that up if you're interested in looking at people who are drunk at Disneyland. All right, so I'm going to start with subtitle and closed captions. So subtitles is going to be capturing all spoken word and making sure it's represented as text on screen. It's important to cover all speech and not just information that's covered as part of the cinematic. Closed captions is going to be taking important audio cues and converting them to text as well. The reason I just defined them is because there are slightly definitions between the US and Europe, so when I talk about them, that's what I mean. So sometimes the audio in-game is going to be just as important to gameplay as speech. So for example, think about the Left 4 Dead series. You know when you hear that music that a horde is coming that you need to prepare. You know when you hear a witch and that crying that there's something you need to do. Now that isn't speech, so closed captions covers that. And actually when Turtle Rock made their closed captioning system, they had that included because that was very important information that affected how you played the game. And it's also important to realize that this is not just for gamers with hearing impairments. It's beneficial to a huge range of gamers. And this includes temporary and situational impairments too. So maybe you're playing on loud public transportation, or maybe you have the volume turned down incredibly low because you have a roommate, or maybe even a child in the next room, so you need subtitles turned on to help you play. As I mentioned previously, this is also great for all of those places that are having their SKU not have localized voiced over. I know this is very common with Asia titles, for example, that you have to be fully reliant on the text to be able to play. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, wow, subtitles, that's pretty easy. We all aim to have subtitles. Well, we also are really good about putting subtitles in and doing them poorly as an industry. So what are the common problems that we see with subtitles in games? Frequently, we're going to have too much text on screen with a combination of extraordinarily long line length and too many lines of text on screen. And when you get that much text on screen, you're likely putting it in a font that's too small as well. So the text is normally going to be really hard to read. It's in a hard-to-read font, or it's in a color that's not high contrast with the background, or it's lacking letterboxing to help address that issue. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll in my notes over here. Where's my mouse? It's on that monitor. Nope. Anyway, so with few exceptions, I don't know. Wait. Is it this one? I don't know which side my monitor is on. Hey, you guys, I just want to let you know, I did skip the rehearsal with my speech, so this is a bad idea. You should not do that. Pro tip. But with only a few exceptions, indication of who is speaking is normally entirely missing, which also adds huge complications. Eventually, I'll have to figure out how to get it over here. Oh. Sorry, I just figured it out. I'm really proud of myself. I'm glad you guys could be here with me for this moment. All right, so subtitles are also displayed inconsistently, with even some games ignoring particular in-game cutscenes. And dynamic in-game audio is largely ignored because people are concerned about the idea of conflicting sounds. In some cases, the settings screen to turn on subtitles can't actually be accessed until you've gotten past the main intro cinematic, which kind of defeats the point. Now, I'm sorry for the low resolution of this screenshot. I want to preface this by saying I love playing Destiny. I have friends who work at Bungie. They are a great example of how not to do subtitles. So this is a screenshot of one of the missions in Venus. So we have pretty much everything you shouldn't be doing happening here. We have 4 lines of text happening simultaneously. They're all very long lines of text. We have a yellow font that does not have a drop shadow and is not letterboxed. So you can see on the yellow area of Venus that is completely blending into the background. You can also notice next to the 27 of the ammo that the T, E, and teleport is actually overlapping with it. And it's kind of harder to see in this, but in between the third and fourth line, you have your experience bar UI that actually shows up and overlaps. So this is pretty much doing everything you shouldn't do simultaneously. So don't do this. This is bad. So you may notice that a lot of the considerations that I'm talking about and how to do them wrong are actually less about having a hearing impairment and more about the visuals of how the subtitles looks. And that's true. In this case, auditory and visual impairments are actually pretty closely linked. Mild vision impairment is commonly found in conjunction with hearing impairments. So those who may have difficulty hearing may be doubly impacted by subtitles that are hard to visually understand. So they're really not getting that information in any way in this case. All right, so how can you make your subtitles better? I call these points my no excuse guidelines. In my mind, there's really no reason you should not hit at least these 4 points. So first off, keep your subtitles centered at the bottom of your screen. There are a couple games that love trying to put them up on top. Don't do that. Keeping subtitles centered at the bottom allows the player's eyes to stay centered and overall provides less eye movement when moving between gameplay and subtitle text. So this actually reduces eye strain and makes them easier to read, which allows the player to read them faster. The second thing is going to be to keep them best case guideline, a maximum of 3 lines at a time. Having more than 3 lines of text at a time likely means your subtitles are too cluttered and they're using a font that is way too small. And frankly, that's just going to be overwhelming. It also means that in many cases, the audio and text displayed are not actually going to match up very well. If you have too much text on screen, your player will not look back at gameplay because they're going to be looking down at how much text you have. And at any rate, having more than this much text on screen at any given time will again increase the distance the player's eye has to move and travel to be able to read the subtitles, which will slow the rate at which the player can read. And this is for all gamers, not just gamers with an impairment. And that will make them harder to read and eventually lead to eye strain. So the third thing is going to be make sure that the spoken text is in upper and lower caps. So I mean the exact same way that I have my bullet points here on the slide. And this allows for greater word recognition, which allows them to read faster. So instead of having to see each individual level or letter in a word, they can see the word as a whole, recognize it, and move on. This is actually the same reason that if you're driving on the highway, you'll notice that any roads or towns on the highway signs are also in lower and uppercase. And this is for the same reason, because it creates word recognition. And finally, audio text should be in all caps, like my static example that I have here. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure on why this is the standard, but I know the BBC says you should do it, and they've kind of been doing subtitles for a very long time, so that was good enough for me. But like I said, you also really need to make sure that you're allowing them to be easy to read. Honestly, first, you should really offer letterboxing. You can either, you can even put it in where it's off by default if you think it's visually obtrusive, but allowing it to be an option that a player can go and turn on is amazingly important for certain gamers. You can have it transparent, fully opaque, whichever. We have to make sure that the text is high contrast with the background at all times, and providing letterboxing ensures that you're doing this. Secondly, you should really be sure to list your speaker. In the event that someone is speaking off camera, or they're speaking on a radio, or something similar, the player can completely lose track of who is talking or what's happening narratively if they don't know who's speaking. And again, this is incredibly important, especially in areas where you're not localizing your VO, because the players can lose track of who is talking if you are not listing it before they start speaking. And then thirdly, really consider your font size and your font color. Making tiny hot pink, or maybe even bright yellow, text an incredibly complex small font will be way harder to read, and it'll slow down the rate at which your players can read your subtitles. But there's still more that you can do to make sure that your subtitles are really good. So if you have your subtitles in a serif font because you think it fits your game's style more, you should really try to offer the player a sans serif font option they can use, and maybe something like Veranda or Helvetica, something simple like that. So sans serif fonts are actually easier to read on digital screens than their serif counterparts. Furthermore, the simpler letters will increase your player's reading speed. And it's actually much easier for gamers with dyslexia. So serif fonts tend to obscure the shapes of letters and make them run together because of the little feet. And having a sans serif font allows dyslexic users to see the shape of the word as they would previously to allow for easier reading. Now, so this is I just said a lot of stuff. So when you put all these together, what do you get? So this is what I call base level accessible. So this is actually dead to rights attribution. So you can see here that the speaker is clearly identified. The text, which is essentially white, contrasts very nicely with the black letterbox that they put behind it. It's also centered at the bottom of the screen using the upper and lowercase letters, and there isn't more than 3 lines of text on screen. I didn't have a video for this, but they also queue up from the bottom and push text up, which is very, very important. So, but there are other ways that you can do subtitles if you want to put more work in. I actually have a short video on, did anyone play Tomb Raider with the subtitles on by chance? All right, like 5 of you. Great.
Got it.
So you can see here that they are first off
Look for the
labeling their speaker clearly.
We're on our way.
And they actually follow the BBC subtitle guidelines where they
Laura,
give each
you mean
speaker
it.
their own color.
Sam,
Because each speaker had their own color, it allows the
Bye.
player to more easily recognize
It's okay.
who's speaking at
One of us.
once.
Sorry
What they
if
also
I
did here
startled
was
you.
give each speaker
This
their
place
own
would
place
make
on
anyone a
screen.
little jumpy.
So just because of its location,
We
you can
just
know who's
spoke to
talking.
your crew.
So
They're on
this
their
is
way.
honestly some of the
Look,
best attempts
he
to do
bandaged my
subtitles
foot.
in games that I've ever seen.
Oh, it was the least I
A
could
lot of
do.
games don't put this much consideration in their subtitles, so, props to Crystal Dynamics for trying. But really, we shouldn't forget systemic VO. Like I mentioned, it's actually a huge problem. So I want to say that first off, gamers, particularly gamers with hearing impairments, know when you are not subtitling this information. So Bayonetta 2 actually won the mainstream accessible game of the year from the Able Gamers Foundation, and you can see even in the review where they rated it very highly, they clearly call out that there's not ambient VO there, which is likely going to be your systemic VO. So a small number of games, like Dead to Rights, which I just showed a minute ago, do actually handle dynamic in-game audio. They do this through a prioritized queuing system. Each sound is assigned a priority level. Here's an example of a system put together as an example by my friend Ian Hamilton, who's another accessibility designer. Oh, I clicked on the wrong thing. So basically, it sets important story dialogue VO, which the player should absolutely in no case not miss, is assigned to 1. Any systemic dialogue, which I tend to think of as combat VO, you're reloading, there's a certain type of baddie over there, they assign to 2. And then other audio cues that may give you context, but not necessarily are as important to gameplay, they assign to 3. So when you see this in action, it would be something like this timestamp example. So when our timer first starts, a character dialogue level 1 sound, we do not want the player to miss, starts playing. And let's say that subtitle is going to be displayed for 2 seconds. It's using up all the lines on the screen. We don't have any more space. So a second in, one of our combat VO, one of our reloading lines has come in. It's less important. We already have enough text on screen. We don't want to display it because we want to make sure that player has access to their level 1 dialogue that's playing right now. So 2 seconds in, that very important character dialogue that we mentioned is done playing, so it's removed from the screen. But then 3 seconds in, we have another combat VO kick in. This time, it's clear we have enough space on the screen for it, so we go ahead and add it. So I know a lot of people are always saying, wow, but we have a lot of sounds in our games, that's going to be a lot of things happening. I don't want to do that because it's going to be way too much text. Well, so when Left 4 Dead launched, it was praised as being the first mainstream game to have fully closed captions, and the accessibility community was really excited. So I'm going to play another video here, and you can see there's going to be a lot of text that's going to be happening at once. But for gamers with impairments, there's no such thing as having too much text. So you can see the player goes and turns it on.
There you go.
Okay.
You are going to notice that the captions are going to go above the recommended 3 lines I mentioned
Just
previously.
keep your eye on whatever happens.
But for gamers
for
with
example, see,
disabilities,
there's
they
a
would
pipe bomb
rather
kicking
have
right there.
extra information or maybe break some of my rules than not have it at
Hunter
all.
growls. There's a hunter somewhere.
Okay.
Tank.
Luckily, since Left 4
There's
Dead
Hunter
isn't a
right
narrative
there.
game, these text lines are
Tank is
often
here.
very, very short,
Oh, yes.
less than 5 words. So it's only resulting in a mild increase in reading difficulty. So as you can see, there's a lot of information that was happening there, and that's information that was all very important to gameplay. You could even hear them note, oh, there was a hunter growling, so he knew there was a hunter there. If a gamer can't hear and they didn't have that option, they wouldn't know that they should be prepping for a hunter. But it's also worth noting, in this video, these gamers actually don't have an impairment. They're just regular gamers who opted to turn them on because they felt like it gave them a better experience. So, and like I said earlier, do not forget to let your players turn this information on. There is nothing worse than starting a game, getting into the main intro cinematic, and then realize that you're missing all of your subtitles, or not being able to go back and turn them on. Okay, so, wow, I spent all that time talking about a single feature. All right, so the next one, sound alternatives. So this is visually representing important sounds in ways other than text. So if you do have a game that has a lot of information that you're getting via audio, you may not want to try to force that into captions. There are other ways you can display information, so on-screen effects, UI, there are different ways that you can do it. So one of the examples I always like to talk about is the Silent Hill series. So if you've ever played the original Silent Hill game, if you were near a baddie, you would start hearing that radio go off. In the original Silent Hill, there is actually no other way to get that information unless you ran into said baddie. But starting off with Silent Hill 2, they started adding a noise grain filter onto their game that could be turned on and off in conjunction with that. So if you could not hear that radio noise, you were still near your baddie, but they weren't adding in text. And it was another way they could visually do that. As the games evolved over time, by the time you get to the later ones like Silent Hill Homecoming, it actually became like a huge part of the visual stylized feel of the game. It was like a film grain that was kind of like sepia toned, but it was still providing you important information. So you can think outside the box. Just because you have a sound doesn't mean you have to force it into text and closed captions. Okay, so training modes and tutorials. I'm talking about a low-pressure place where gamers can learn, and you should always aim to make them interactive. So training modes and tutorials are obviously highly important for all gamers, but there is a difference between having them and doing them well. Having well-implemented tutorials, especially for gamers with disabilities, needs to have I'm really sorry, guys. Let me take a drink of tea. All right. It needs to have an element of interaction. So the combination of interaction and instruction gives more of a means of making an association and remembering. And practicing the interaction, preferably more than once, in the context of gameplay, especially in a low-pressure environment, is less demanding on short-term memory, and it allows them to recall the instruction easier in the future when they go to play. So another really important thing that people tend to mess up is timer-free text prompts. If you're giving the player a prompt and you have no voiceover associated with it, it's really important to not restrict the amount of time the players have to read. And the reason I say this, so low reading age is actually extraordinarily common in adults. 15% of adults have a reading age below the age of 11 years. Additionally, a distraction can be a huge issue for all gamers, sometimes resulting in key information being missed. And it's also not possible to set a speed of text going through that'll make a great fit for all gamers. Even within very specific reading age brackets, the ability is going to vary massively. So instead of a timer, one of the best things you can do is allow the player to dismiss it or select their action when they're done. So it'll allow them to step through these prompts. If that's not possible, maybe allow them to replay it or pause it so they have time to read it properly. Any of those methods remove the requirement for players having a specific reading speed or having to constantly maintain attention at what they're doing. So, and if you feel that having a player step through each individual prompt is maybe a little extreme, oh my goodness, you guys. It's a good thing I'm the last talk of the day. All right. If you feel that's going to be too much input or that's requiring too much of your player, you can just provide a feature that lets them auto-advance it. Or maybe it auto-advances automatically and players can turn that off. That actually is something that's hugely popular in, wow, not popular, popular. So funny story, you guys, this is actually true. I always joke around with people that I'm so popular, or poplar, like the tree, and I send text messages of trees to people, and apparently I've just taken to saying poplar instead of popular, so that was a fun story. Anyway, it's really popular with Japanese imports to do something like that. All right, so Twilight Princess, I'm a huge Zelda fan, actually is a really good example. So this is both. So not only do they make you do an input to advance through the tutorials, when you go to learn how to use your slingshot, for example, it's no pressure. This player could have taken as long as they wanted to hit all of those bullseyes. So, and because they had to hit multiple bullseyes, they got to repeat it. So this is an example of mashing up two different features that are accessible and doing them in the same place. All right. Remappable controls, or customizable controls is another very, very important feature. So it allows the player to set controls as they see fit. Maybe rather than placing fire on right trigger, which is incredibly common, they want to place it on X. This feature allows them to do just that. Although it's fairly common on keyboards with PC, this needs to happen on controllers and consoles. So remappable controls are one of the best value accessibility features, actually. Many people with motor impairments, whether it's permanent, like they were born with a certain impairment or they've had a stroke, it's temporary, like the broken arm I mentioned previously, or even situational, maybe they're just playing on the phone or holding a baby. They benefit greatly from being able to move essential controls into positions where they're able to reach them more easily. According to all of the top game accessibility groups, this is the #1 feature requested by gamers with disabilities. So, and it's also critical for gamers playing with custom controllers. Actually, in a recent petition by askacapper.com, he got over 80,000 signatures requesting that we could try to make game control remapping or customizable controls a standard across the industry. And there's also this really common misconception that somehow remappable controls violate first-party submission rules, that it'll be a problem in TCR or TRC, and this is actually not true at all. So if it were true, I doubt that, important people at Sony would be talking about how much they like doing it. But I think this is an example that shows that, not just gamers with impairments are going to be using these features. Continuing on controls, additional control options is actually really important. So where I'm talking about having different control configurations presets, inversion for the joysticks, sensitivity adjustments for the analog sticks, southpaw, toggle options, they really can help a lot of people. Now, if you want to get super fancy, you can combine both of these features. Combining the ability to remap with these additional control options is essentially the holy grail of game accessibility. And it pretty much lets any player who needs to remap controls, regardless of what their reason, be able to do it and be able to play your title. So you were like, wow, I don't really understand why this is so important, Tara. I get that, and I love Indiana Jones, but I'm not seeing the connection. Well, so on standard controllers, sometimes it's just someone with an impairment who's close to being able to use a standard controller and can't. And so they can't use your default control scheme how you intended them to be able to play. Particularly the shoulder buttons on all controllers, the R2, L2, so they require the largest range of motion and strength to be able to input on those two buttons. Due to the location on the back of the controller, they're also really limiting on how you can hold your controller if you want to be able to play. But these two buttons are also very, very important in games. They're commonly going to be aim and fire. So it's this combination of being very, very important buttons with buttons that are very, very hard to use that remaps them that makes them the most frequently remapped buttons. I did a totally non-scientific Twitter survey, and it totally confirmed these results. Nearly all the responses I got said that these were the buttons they were trying to move. This is actually one example that I got sent of a gamer who wanted to change the Uncharted multiplayer to a different scheme. So you can see on this one that the important actions, so aiming and fire, have been moved off of the trigger buttons because he had issues with those. And he put them on the face buttons where he could lay the controller down and be able to use it that way. But you can see that he put reload on left trigger because he didn't actually have to use reload if he didn't want to. He could just, waste some ammo and have it automatically happen. Now, some players can't use a standard controller, and that's when they're going to go to custom controllers, right? So this is actually an example from Evil Controllers, who partners. Oh my goodness, you guys! I continue not to be able to talk. All right, but they partnered with the Able Gamers Foundation to develop a series of accessible controllers. This one is for a gamer that has some sort of left-handed impairment, so all of the left-handed buttons have been moved to the right side of the controller. But depending on the default control scheme, even having a customized controller may not be able to help them out. And even if you're thinking, well, that's pretty simple, it probably works, there are some extreme controllers out there. So this is actually a Xbox 360 controller. This is a puff and sift controller, which is made for quadriplegics. There are sometimes you're going to get a control scheme that is just not physically going to work with this. I've seen occasions where the default control scheme is literally going to require this player to inhale and exhale in the same place at the same time. So being able to remap, especially when these gamers are trying so hard to be able to play your game, is incredibly important. Now, the other question I always get is like, well, why don't these guys just get a controller where they can remap on their end instead of requiring the developer to make their software have the remapping in it? Well, it's because it's incredibly, incredibly expensive. So Evil Controllers, again, partnered with Able Gamers, made the Adroit controller, which allows you to do just that. You can remap the buttons on the hardware versus the software. As you can see, that controller costs just as much as a new PS4. So we are making a huge boundary for these gamers to be able to play. And again, we're essentially asking them to bring their own ramp to a building with only stairs. I also want to again stress that remapping on a keyboard is not the same as remapping a controller. So if you're a PC title, you just don't get a pass if you support controllers. Many gamers who use custom controllers will buy Microsoft ones so they can actually still use it with their PC. In the event that you do not offer remappable controls, these gamers are going to start buying additional software and overlaying that with your title, which is going to affect how they play your title and likely give them an even worse gaming experience than if you had just offered the ability for them to do that from the onset. So you're like, wow, Tara, remappable controls, that's a lot of stuff to do. I don't even know how to do it. Well, good news. I know, so I'm going to tell you. So there are really two popular ways that you can remap, and they're both really proven methods that we've seen games that do well ship with. So if your game has very simple controls, and you typically don't assign more than one action to a button at the same time, I recommend you go with the list method over here on the left. If you have something more complex, I recommend the button swap method that I have on the right. So you can see in the list method, which is highly popular for fighting games. Almost all fighting games support remappable controls because the community loves to build their own arcade sticks or essentially a custom controller. You basically just scroll through and assign the action you want. You can throw in a couple error messages so people don't miss things or double assign things. That's pretty much it. So the step one is obviously going to be offering multiple control schemes to a player with an array of options. In most cases, you're likely trying to appeal to different types of gamers. In the fighting game example that I had, they always have a default control scheme. One is for players on the gamepad, and the other is going to be for someone on an arcade stick. But there are other reasons that you may want to be offering multiple control schemes. So maybe you're making a cover-based game with a really strong narrative. You're likely going to get both fans of the Gears of War franchise and the Uncharted franchise playing your game, right? Maybe you offer a control scheme, one that's similar to one title and one that's similar to another, so players have a more easy time adapting to your title. But what's really great is one of those will probably work better for a gamer with an impairment than the other one would. And then, like I said, after you let the player select their control scheme, just give them a list, let them do their thing, and they'll be able to work fine. Now, if you have a game that has more complex controls, so I'm talking about you're assigning multiple actions to one button. Maybe you tap X to pick a thing up and you hold X to reload, or in different situations, a button does different things based on what type of gameplay you're doing. I would recommend going with the Borderlands 2 method of button swapping. So it's actually really easy, just as before. You start with multiple control schemes with a different array of options, but there's something you need to consider this time. You need to focus on making sure in your different control schemes that you're mixing up some of the actions you're putting on these different buttons. So you can see my example here, that on the black control scheme, I've paired action and reload, but over on the blue control scheme, I have paired action and use cover. So maybe in some circumstances, it's easier for a player to do one than the other, or maybe one they're more likely to want to do, so you give them the option to do that. Or maybe that just works better with their controller. So after they can select whatever control scheme they want, all you have to do is allow them to swap the actions, and I'm talking all of it. So in Borderlands, when you enter button swap mode, you select the button you want to move, and then select the button you want to swap with, and then it just automatically swaps them for you. That's it. You can either save at that point, or you continue button swapping. Now, it's really important to note, I am not asking you how to remap things such as your menu navigation or menu input. I'm not asking for joystick analog inputs to be remapped with digital button input. I'm not asking anything that's violating certification, first-party roles, any of that. None of my examples did any of these things. So the next question I get all the time in regards to remappable controls is, wow, okay, but what do I do to QuickTime events? So gamers with disabilities would rather prefer that whatever button that was happening on just gets remapped with the rest of them. But if you've set your game up already in a way that maybe that's not possible, they would rather you let them remap everything else and leave those the way they are than not let them remap it at all. But there's still other things you can do. So you can actually do a bypass mode for QuickTime events or button mashing. Because these cause problems for a lot of gamers. I mean, not just gamers with disabilities, but other gamers as well. It can nearly ruin a game for them. Actually, my husband and I, we had a really amazing bonding experience with Resident Evil 5. Man, I knew that since we could make it through the Wesker fight on the plane, we were going to last forever, honey. Because that was terrible, because he's really, really bad at QuickTime events, and I'm not. So it was frustrating. But QTEs require rapid precision, which for gamers with a wide range of strength or accuracy-related impairments can be a huge barrier, or in some cases exclude them completely, especially in the case of QTEs where the level of accurate timing required is very, very specific. Now, it's really important to let gamers who struggle with them get around this. QTEs are just seconds. It's really, so you probably don't have a minute of QTEs in your entire game, so it'd be really unfortunate that due to a minute of gameplay, someone can't engage your title, period. So like I said, just allow them to have like an auto pass option, or allow them to turn the timer off, give them as much time as they need to be able to do it. Or maybe allow them to do a single press instead of having to mash something repeatedly. So Resident Evil 6 actually has a auto-complete option, which they call auto-action. Originally, it was only available for their amateur difficulty. However, they received enough requests from other players who were playing on other difficulties. They later patched it in for the full difficulty range. So to me, this really shows that you're going to get other gamers who want to use this feature as well. Like I said, there are some people who are not gamers with impairments who just really don't like QTEs. Whew, okay. I just wanted to, I've been doing a lot of information all the time. Like I said, I knew I was going to do that. So I wanted us to take a little mental break. So this is my cat, Herschel. She's really cute. She weighs 17 pounds. She's a large cat. So, all right. We're all recharged. Okay, let's go back in. All right, so a wide range of difficulty levels. So it's fairly standard to see a game with 2 or 3 difficulty levels, but we need a larger spectrum, not just for gamers with an array of impairments, but it actually increases the market, as we'll need a lot more gamers. We need to let as many gamers play as possible without feeling frustrated. So, and with recent technological improvements, such as PlayStation Now, where you don't actually need a console, you only need a Sony TV, we can brace for a larger influx of more casual gamers coming into the market. So they also benefit from a wider range of difficulty levels. So the easiest level, honestly, should be something that your grandmother could play without getting frustrated on. Some players just want to play, they just want to experience the narrative, but they are blocked because they lack some skill required for your gameplay system. Rather than blocking them completely, give them their own mode. If you're worried about scoreboards, achievements, then just restrict it so it only counts on if it's done on normal level or higher. This is totally fine. This doesn't violate anything. There are plenty of games out there that do this already. So it can be incredibly frustrating if a gamer goes through all of the trouble of getting their very complex puff and sip controller set up just so they can be able to play, only find out it's actually too hard for them anyway. So actually, I was recently browsing GameFAQs, and a person had it added on a comment on a game, which I'll leave nameless. I recently showed this game to my brother after I played it and finished it for the first time. He seems really, really interested in it, but he's disabled. I got it worked out where he can use the controller to play the game, but the game's difficulty is killing his experience. So this is really frustrating. Like, this gamer tried so hard just to be able to play this title, and he still can't. All right, so mission critical help. So what do I mean by mission critical help? I mean things like tooltips, press right trigger to fire your new gun, God shaders on mission critical objects so they're high contrast. Think like the gold in the BioShock games. In-game GPS, which you've seen in Fable or Dead Space, that allow you to navigate levels more easily. These little bits of extra information greatly improve how a player interacts with the game. Both of these features can be incredibly important to both gamers with cognitive and visual impairments, as it ensures they won't miss key information. Colorblind friendly. And I know it's ironic because my picture here isn't colorblind friendly. So this is a game accessibility that most developers are aware of when you talk about game accessibility and making sure it's accessible. This is normally the first one that comes to mind, which it should be, with over 9% of US males being colorblind. So don't have any information displayed on color alone. Patterns, word, gauges, all of that can help address this. And there are other ones to consider. I'm not talking about just red and green. There's also blue, yellow, and a few different other ones. So just because you're not using red and green doesn't mean that you're being colorblind friendly. And honestly, with how common it is, you probably have someone in your office who's colorblind, so this should be like super easy to play test, sit them down, do they know what's happening? Yes, no. All right, assistive modes. So for gamers with issues with fine motor control, or maybe they even just have something like extreme arthritis, assistive modes can be a lifesaver. Auto-aiming is what it sounds like. When you pull the trigger, it automatically locks onto the player in front of you. For aim assist, many gamers want to be able to use a slider instead of just a toggle, which is what's most common in games today. Many gamers like the ability to snap to an enemy, which they may have trouble doing on their own. So when you're giving them a slider, it allows them to turn the option on as much or as little as they need, but it still allows you to offer a good default for your core player base. Many also request the ability to lock on enemies. Another good example is like when you hold a button in Zelda and it just locks on for you. Or they want to have the ability to center the reticule when they walk forward. For someone with a limited range of motion, these are both really, really incredibly helpful. Now, I wanted to call out Fallout 3 here because even when these features are added as core gameplay, not necessarily as an accessibility feature, gamers who need these will take them and use them to advantage. So for example, Fallout 3 was highly recommended to gamers with mobility impairments. Fallout 3 wasn't built to be accessible, it just happened to be. When gamers figured out that they could dump all of their skill points into the VAT system, they suddenly had auto-aim and they could play. So that's why it ended up getting picked up and it was very popular in game accessibility communities. All right, now obviously not every game has multiplayer, but if you are, consider multiplayer profiles. So some gamers want to play, wow, you guys, I swear to God I practiced this talk before I got up here. All right, so some gamers want to play multiplayer and are going to engage your game in a very different way. Maybe they want to play with other casual gamers. Maybe they hate using their mics. Allowing gamers to share their preferences and being paired with like gamers is incredibly important. So if players are unable to hear other players' speech, or maybe they're unable to communicate, maybe due to a lack of vocal activity, or maybe they just don't actually have a mic at home, or maybe they don't even just like to talk to other gamers, this can have a huge impact on their multiplayer play, and often results in players being intentionally kicked out or excluded from games going forward. So matchmaking preferences can help avoid this issue. So it will allow gamers who prefer to play with speech and those without speech to be paired together. So I actually have another example story from a user on Reddit talking about his multiplayer gaming experience. So sometimes people get angry and yell at me because I don't react to some sounds and like footsteps when enemies are walking up behind me. I then explain to them that I'm deaf. They would say like, oh wow, or Jesus Christ. Sometimes they get upset that I don't use a microphone, but I don't really speak. I use sign language to communicate in real life. So this is something that like actually very much impacts how people play games. Or, you know, sometimes honestly, as a female in games, I don't want to talk because depending on who's in that room, the reaction I can get from the 12-year-old boy who is upset that he got headshotted by a chick is, you know, it's a little extreme. So, you know, that's another example of how it'll go beyond just gamers with impairments. Now, a couple examples of this. So Halo Reach, which was one of my favorite multiplayer games, they totally have this. You can set your chattiness, motivation, teamwork, and I would get paired with other players who weren't going to be upset if I decided not to talk. But I also wanted to highlight DTA and their lobby options. So sometimes people are like, wow, but Tara, you said I should allow someone to like totally crank up their auto aim or, you know, give them an enemy snap to, and other gamers may think that that's cheating. Well, what you can end up doing is just pair players who are using those preferences together. If you have players who don't want to be paired with other players who are using auto-aim, just let them search and party make via not being grouped together. And I know, obviously, that both of these titles have like a huge player base, so breaking the gamers into smaller groups isn't going to be a huge problem. Obviously, if you give gamers too many options on how they can filter, you may end up in the lobby by yourself, so be smart about it. All right, and I swear to God, guys, we're getting really close to done. Not just because I'm almost out of time. All right, audio sliders. So this is a feature that is actually really, really common in games, and people don't think of it as an accessibility feature. So loss of hearing can affect certain frequencies more than others, so being able to control volume is amazingly essential. Being able to distinguish individual sounds is particularly important when visual cues are not able to be detected as easily. Too many different sound sources simultaneously can make it difficult for a user of any degree of auditory ability to focus on a single one of them easily. There's actually a specific condition called auditory processing disorder for which simultaneous sounds can be impossible to distinguish or physically frustrating and distressing to the user. So giving the player the option to control what they're hearing can increase their comprehension and alleviate stress. And like I said, not to rep my own game, it's incredibly common, even just in the order 1886. So we have all three sliders, and we even had a master volume option. So this should be super easy to do. All right, and the last thing I want to talk about is documentation. So one of the largest problems that gamers with impairments have is they don't actually know what features have been included in a game that affects them. For these gamers, they don't know if they're going to be able to play a game until either A, they've bought it themselves and opened it up and tried it, or B, a copy is like donated to their favorite charity and it's been reviewed, which may never actually happen. This frequently results in the players not being able to play a game and not knowing it until after they purchased it and opened it. Now they can't return it and they can't play it. I mean, I guess they could trade it into GameStop for like $2, right? They lost time and money because this information just wasn't available to them. buying a game to find out you can't play it is a real issue and easily solved by just letting people know what features you're putting into your game. And even without that, the work on those features may go to waste. There is a large sect of gamers with disabilities who won't buy a title if they don't know if they can play it. So even if you've done something like added in remappable controls and they don't know, they still won't buy your game. So where can we put this information? One thing I think of, we're already in the business of adding specs and limited feature information on like Steam or the back of the box, so maybe it's not going too far to add that place or add that information in a place customers already look. Honestly, I don't quite have the answer for this. For all I know, doing it this way is really cost prohibitive. But your business probably has a website of some sort. There's probably some game website, right? Or maybe you have a place where you can buy your game online and you have a description. Maybe you could just add it there. So this icon that I have on the slide was actually developed by Special Effects, which is a nonprofit in the UK. They added it so that anyone could download it and take it and just put it as an icon of, hey, we're trying to make games accessible. So if many people pick it up, like, it'll start aiding in recognition and people know that, hey, you're trying. But, maybe you don't want to put this on your website. You're just staunchly against it for whatever reason. Donate a copy of your game to a charity such as Able Gamers or Special Effect. Be like, hey, we want you to review it and just put the information out there. You may not have every accessibility feature, but even if you have a couple of, they will put that information out there, and that's free press for you, right? And, all the things of today, none of them are like rocket science. I haven't said anything that's truly earth-shattering. If you plan to do these early, none of them are hard to implement. But I know a lot of these features can be incredibly hard, or in some cases, literally impossible to implement if you try to retrofit them into your title. So always, please, 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 think early. All right, so just as a little bit of a recap, this is what I talked about today. Like I said, it's all pretty basic stuff. That doing this helps gamers with disabilities, and it's stuff that will really engage your core player base as well. Now, you may be thinking, oh my god, that was awesome, Tara. I want to know more. Well, good news for you guys. So these are actually both step-by-step guidelines that provide a roadmap on what to implement for game accessibility. I only talked about 15 or so features today. But for example, the Game Accessibility Guidelines website on the left, they have over 100. Includification, which was done by the Able Gamers Foundation. So they even have developer challenges on like, hey, think about your game in these terms. How does it work? It also has letters to the industry, personal and professional stories that will actually make it very humanizing for you to think about as well. Both of these are great places to go. One of the things that's really great is everything is in 3 basic categories. So basic, intermediate, advanced. And everything in here is tiered on the balance of 3 things. Reach, so the number of people it's going to benefit. Impact, the difference that feature would then make to those people. And value, the cost to implement. From there, it's even actually divided further. You can look on impairment types, so motor, cognitive, visual, and speech. And just some general considerations that are a good tip. And if you get through all of that and you're like, oh my god, I have so many more questions, Sarah, there are more and more places you can go. Like I said, there are 2 other places, the IGDA Game Accessibility SIG and Special Effect in the UK will have tons more information. So originally I'd be like, oh my god, we should have questions, but I ran over because apparently I'm bad at timing. So what I can do instead, if you have any questions for me, the wrap-up room is just right out here. Before you reach the bathrooms, please go ahead and take the time to fill out your survey. The only way I can keep talking about game accessibility and helping gamers with disabilities is if you rate me and said you liked me, even though I ran out of time for questions at the end. And you can always hit me up on Twitter, and I will answer more stuff. So without, I'm actually out of time, but thank you guys so much. Thank you for coming. I hope you guys had a great GDC.